Hello everyone, Jay Warden here and welcome to my recap and review of the episode 11001001. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue that, does it? A brilliant episode finally with spoilers ahead, so please enjoy. The Enterprise is docking up with Starbase 74 to get some maintenance and upgrades on the ship. As Picard notes in his log how he's been quite pleased with the ship so far, we get a search for Spock montage of the Enterprise docking inside the huge starbase, and Picard congratulates them all on a job well done. Picard and Riker go to the airlock to greet the maintenance team coming aboard to do their work. The team is headed up by Commander Quinteros, and he says that he was in charge of the team who built the Enterprise in the first place. Along with the team are a pair of diminutive purple aliens called the Binars. He explains that they're a unified pair and that they always complete each other's sentences because of their interlinked nature. Picard is pleased to meet them, but says they really must get their upgrades done within 48 hours because they've really got another mission to get to by then. The Binars seem a bit concerned about the lack of time, but say there'll be no problem, and Picard says Riker and he will remain on board should they need anything in the meantime. Picard then gives us a bit more exposition on the Binars, that they're basically so interconnected with their master computer on the homeworld that they literally think in binary code, before saying he's going to lose himself in a good book. On the bridge, Wesley is observing the Binars, who've been joined by another pair as they work and talk frantically to each other. As Riker asks why more of them are turned up, they seem very excited but also acting a little shifty, and say they needed the extra help because of the time limit imposed on them. Riker seems a little suspicious of them, so tells Wesley to keep an eye on them and goes for a wander around the ship. As he walks about, he bumps into Yar and Worf, who are off to have some sort of game, and then comes across Data doing some painting with LaForge's help, and finds it all very amusing that a blind man is teaching an android how to paint. He pays a visit to Dr. Beverly, who's very excited about a conference she's going to, but sadly has no time to talk to him right now. Finally, he comes to the holodeck and finds a pair of Binars working on it. They say they've repaired the previous problems and have added some enhancements, and asks if he wants to go try it out. Since he's got nothing better to do right now, he takes them up on the offer. So he tells the computer to whip up a jazz club, some band members and a private audience. He doesn't like blondes too much though, and wants to find himself a nice sultry brunette in a hot looking red dress he can have some fun with, and finally it seems Riker has found the diversion he wanted. He congratulates the Binars on finding just the right kind of porn he wants, and then dives straight in with his best chat-up lines. The sultry lady introduces herself as Minuet, and the two get on like a house on fire. The Binars meanwhile continue to look a bit shifty and make adjustments to the holodeck controls before leaving Riker to his pleasure. As Wesley satisfies his curiosity about the Binars, Picard comes up and asks him where Riker is before heading down to the holodeck to see what he's up to. Riker meanwhile is showing off his trombone skills to impress his new hololady, and she's certainly digging his style. He says he's got to leave for a bit though to get on with his duties, but Minuet asks him to stay for a dance before he goes, and Riker, being a learned member of the School of Kirk Seduction, can never refuse a pretty lady, so happily says why not. As they dance, Riker marvels at just how real and sophisticated she seems, even though he knows she's just a computer-generated image. But it's clear his cock probably doesn't know the difference, so he asks just how far he can go with her, and she's like, well, as far as you want baby, so starts making out with her. And then Picard just walks in. You know, if he had gone just a little further, this could have gotten really awkward. Seriously, have you guys never heard of privacy, or perhaps just locking the door? Picard is impressed with Riker's choice, and then Minuet surprises them both by speaking some fluent French to Picard, and invites him over to join them at the bar, making me wonder if this is going to suddenly turn into some sort of awkward threesome. Meanwhile, Wesley calls Data and says there seems to be a problem in engineering with the antimatter containment fields, and wants to know if they can check it out for him. LaForge says they'll go to engineering directly to check it out, but not to disturb the captain about it just yet. Once they get down there, they confirm that the containment fields are indeed rapidly failing, and if the antimatter is released, it will destroy the ship and probably the starbase as well. Data calls a red alert and tries to call the captain, but gets no response, with the computer saying they've only got minutes before the containment field fails. So Data calls the crew and tells them to abandon ship immediately with haste. Once on the bridge, he sets the ship on an automated course away from the starbase, then tries to locate Picard and Riker. Oddly, the computer just evades the question by saying all decks are empty, which puzzles them a bit, but they don't have time to really think about that right now, so they promptly leave. Once on the starbase though, they realise that Picard and Riker are still on the ship, and then the containment field spontaneously regenerates. But before they can really do anything about it, the ship has already backed out of the starbase and gone to warp. On the now empty ship, Picard and Riker are still enjoying the company of Minuet, and Picard finally realises that three's a crowd and it's time to get back to work. Minuet though seems desperate to try and keep him from leaving and insists he just can't go yet, but now she's tipped them off that something might be wrong, so exit the holodeck to find the ship abandoned and on red alert. Picard gets an update from the computer on what's going on and then wants to know where the ship is headed. It seems they're on a course for the planet Binus, the homeworld of the Binars, so they had good reason to be looking very shifty earlier. They go back to Minuet and realise she's part of a lure to keep Riker behind and that Picard was just a fortuitous bonus. It seems the Binars needed a senior officer on board for some reason, but she can't tell them why, so go and get some phasers to help retake the ship. First though, they must assume the worst and go to engineering so Picard can initiate the auto-destruct sequence. Unfortunately, they've only got 5 minutes because someone decided a hard-coded time limit was a really good idea for an auto-destruct sequence. Once set, they head off to the bridge, but Riker notices that a huge amount of data is being dumped into their computers from the Binar's home planet. So they beam onto the bridge at separate points to try and surprise the Binars, but they only find them slumped on the floor, perhaps barely alive. Picard demands to know why they stole his ship, but they just weakly ask for help before falling unconscious. With the ship seemingly under their control again, they shut off the auto-destruct sequence and try to piece together why the Binars did this in the first place, but find that their homeworld is basically dead with its main computer and subsystems offline. So they take a look at all the data they received and find it's basically the entire operating system of their homeworld copied onto the ship. Riker wishes they'd left a note behind to help them, and Picard says they probably did, so head back to the holodeck to see Minuet. She explains that a star went supernova in their system, but that they miscalculated and the EM pulse of the supernova threatened to knock out their master computer. Wait, a star went supernova in their home system? As in, a star full-on exploded? I'm no astrophysicist, but I'm pretty sure that a supernova would completely destroy the entire system. She says that because the Enterprise was late and the supernova happened earlier than expected, they had to improvise and steal the ship to get the data dumped in order to save their civilization in a desperate act. In order to restore the planet, they have to transfer the data back to the master computer on the planet, but they don't know quite how to accomplish this. So Picard and Riker head back to the bridge and get in contact with the starbase. Data gives them a clue and it helps narrow down the file they need to begin the transfer, but just to make matters slightly more complicated, both Picard and Riker need to operate the system at the same time. With the transfer underway, the sleeping Binars slowly awaken and check in with their homeworld. They find everything is being restored and all is well, so they extend their gratitude before saying they'll happily return to the starbase to face punishment for their actions. Picard asks why they didn't just ask for help in the first place, and they reply that they feared they would simply say no. With their homeworld saved, Picard takes the helm and brings the ship back to the starbase where everyone else comes back on board. He gets the crew to start checking out the ship to make sure it's not any worse for wear for its little adventure, whilst Riker goes down to check on Minuet and start hitting on her again. But sadly for him, she seems to have gone and just a poor facsimile is in her place. Dejected, he heads back to the bridge, but Picard says it's probably for the best and some things just aren't meant to be, especially when you're dealing with a fantasy woman. Riker agrees but admits that she'll be quite hard to forget as the ship heads off to its next adventure. Finally, we have what is by far the best episode of Season 1, and it's solid from start to finish. We've got a genuinely fascinating alien race with the Binars, we see Picard and Riker work great as a team together, we get some nice little character moments, some good use of the holodeck, and Wesley doesn't even save the day and it's done coherently and at a consistent pace. It's just a shame that it's taken us over half the season now to get here. Anyway, let's get on with it. I'll start with the Binars. They looked, behaved, and sounded genuinely alien, not just in the way that they communicated in their own language, but how they fluidly complete each other's sentences and even their body language. Their makeup work was great, and using diminutive actors all helped to really sell their alien nature. They're just a brilliantly realised concept overall, and that makes such a welcome change for Season 1, which has had quite a few good concepts but almost always falls flat on its face implementing them. The idea of a race that is so closely integrated with its computers to the point they literally can't live without them is one that has parallels to our own culture as our technology advances further and further. Even more so today than when this came out in the late 80s, given the advent of the internet and the proliferation of computers and smartphones since the episode aired. Because of this, they remain one of the most distinctive and memorable aliens in the franchise, and it's a real shame we never get to see them again in any future episodes of TNG or any of the other shows, except for a brief mention on Enterprise. I also really enjoyed the laid-back start to this episode. We get some great shots of the Enterprise docking with the starbase, though to be fair, much of this footage is reused from the search for Spock, just pasting the Enterprise D in place of the original Enterprise. But we finally get a sense that there's something to the Federation beyond just the odd ship we see here and there, and I've always loved this particular starbase design, a colossal city in space essentially. There's even a little nod to continuity as Picard mentions getting some maintenance done on the ship, particularly in regards to the holodeck, which of course suffered problems in the Big Goodbye. Riker wandering about the ship and seeing what everyone was up to was a great way to give everyone some little character moments, giving us brief insights into what our crew get up to on their downtime. Of particular note is Data's foray into painting, something which will come up again a few times in the future, as well as his continued friendship with Geordi. I also got a kick out of Riker's comment about the blind man teaching an android how to paint. It's also refreshing that throughout the episode, everyone was smart and did their jobs properly. For example, when it seems the ship is minutes away from exploding, Data quickly and effectively takes command and makes sure the ship is promptly evacuated, and the ship moved away as quickly as possible from the starbase to save everyone. Since he can't communicate with Picard or Riker, this is perhaps the first example of Data doing his job as the second officer, and doing it well. I also like how he doubts himself afterwards when they realise Picard and Riker are still on the ship, wondering if he did the right thing. It's actually a very human thing to do. As for Picard and Riker, these two make a great team together when shit hits the fan. Once they realise that Minuet was just a distraction keeping them from seeing what's going on, Picard does the smart thing and sets the auto-destruct sequence first and then goes to retake control of the ship, and that makes total sense. If no one else is on board and you can't rely on further support, and you presume hostile aliens have taken control of the ship, you don't want that ship to fall into the wrong hands, and if you're incapacitated or killed, then there'll be nothing left to stop any presumed hostiles from taking their prize. My only complaint here was the arbitrary hard time limit given when all other subsequent self-destruct sequences allow for the countdown limit to be specified. Anyway, once they do retake control, they deactivate the destruct sequence and quickly figure out what's going on, and manage to save the day themselves by sending the Binar's computer system back to their homeworld. Teamwork! I will say that the Binar's plan had a couple of holes in it, notably that it had to rely on 2 people to send the data back to their planet because as a race they always work in pairs. It's implied they only kept one officer behind, Riker, to help enact their plan if they failed to do it themselves. So it's just really lucky I guess that Picard barged in on Riker's holodeck time and gets ensnared by Minuet's charms. Speaking of Minuet, she's well played by Carolyn McCormick and comes across as a convincingly seductive and intelligent woman who would appeal to both Riker and Picard because of her intellect. The dialogue is rather cheesy, but the episode wisely doesn't spend too much time on that, only doing what's necessary to keep Riker and Picard's interest in her while the shenanigans go on outside the holodeck. It also further reinforces Riker's work ethic, his ambitions and desire to be a captain someday, and his total focus on that goal, and also introduces his love of jazz and trombone playing skills. This won't be the first time though that a character falls in love or at least gets infatuated with a holodeck character, and it brings up uncomfortable questions on just how addictive a device like the holodeck would be if it existed in the real world. I'm not entirely sure though why Minuet disappears at the end, as I got the impression that Binars programmed her before their master computer was dumped into the Enterprise, so I always figured that she was just a separate program they installed. But I guess we can't have Riker dating a holographic lady for the rest of the show. What a joy it is to have such a solid episode finally. Really any problems I do have are just nitpicks and easily forgivable ones at that. The writing was consistent, the acting was good, the plot was interesting, and the characters were memorable. Just more of this, please. Next time, a retired Starfleet admiral comes on board to deal with a hostage situation in the episode Too Short a Season. Please feel free to leave any comments or feedback, and if you enjoyed this episode then please do like, subscribe and share. This has been Jay Warden, signing off.